As I went through the program that is lined up for the day, I thought I can just give an outline addressing the questions like what is pharmacovigilance and some terminologies that we use in pharmacovigilance, what's happening at the international level, and what is the status in India today as of the national scenario, and maybe touch upon an issue of drug safety issues in clinical trials, because we have been talking about the process of drug development and ICH GCP guidelines, and afternoon again you have some topics on, I think, ethics in biomedical research or in clinical research. So I thought it may be more appropriate just to add few slides of some information on pharmacovigilance in clinical trials and trying to focus it more on what would be the role of the members or role of the ethics committee in drug safety monitoring when it comes to the clinical trials. Just to address this question, what is pharmacovigilance? It is concerned with the development of science and regulation in the area of drug safety or the medication safety. So it's relatively a new science that has developed over a period of last 2 decades to a great extent, and it basically aims at the detection, assessment, and prevention of adverse drug effects and other problems related to the use of medicines. So this science is, in today's world, is actually the more gives an edge to make more of regulatory issues as a science in terms of whether to introduce a drug to a market or whether that particular medication should continue in the market or it needs to be withdrawn or does it need any further cautionary labels and so on. So because of these issues, as safety has become prime concern, the pharmacovigilance is gaining more importance. So to answer the question, why pharmacovigilance? Any new medication that comes into the market is a process by itself. It's a property of the pharmaceutical company. It takes at least $1 billion and 10 to 12 years by the time it reaches for a general use. So obviously it becomes the property of a pharmaceutical company. So we fight for intellectual property rights and so on. So once it passes through the phase 1, phase 2, and then the phase 3 trials, obviously the product approved for the use in general population. So once it is being approved for the general population, then efficacy, cost, and safety are of the interest to the community. Though it is a property of the pharmaceutical company, because they have invested $1 billion, perhaps they would like to make another $9 or $10 billion out of this whole business. But you also look at the other side of the issue, that is the society, where lots of individuals are consuming this medication and the safety becomes more important as far as the aspect is concerned. More often, the clinical trials are intended for objective demonstration of clinical efficacy, and we can't possibly have all safety information built in or all safety information is explored when you conduct a clinical trial for very obvious reasons, including the duration of the treatment, number of patients that is being tried, and the type of trials that we conduct, and so on. So what does pharmacovigilance as a science do? 2 main important issues that it would address is check if the drugs in the market fulfill their role in the society. So a drug has been introduced into the market for a particular intention or a particular purpose, that is to alleviating human suffering and also reduce disease-related economic loss. So these are the 2 important reasons why if we have the medications available in the market, then obviously we need to have some mechanism to check this, and pharmacovigilance is a science which basically aims at studying whether the alleviating human suffering and the reduced disease-related economic loss are being achieved through this. So I would like to introduce to some terminologies used in pharmacovigilance. So adverse drug reaction is a very common terminology that we use. I'm sure all of you know about this and I don't really want to read out. But one thing which we need to understand is we have to really look at it occurs at doses normally used. That's an important issue because many times I have been working in the area of more than 10 years in Indian setup now, and we try to encourage the prescribers to report an adverse drug reaction, and often one of the important reasons why questions that is asked to us is that if I report an adverse drug reaction, is that possible I may be taken to a consumer court, or is it possible that some legal issues come into the picture because the patient has developed an adverse drug reaction. But as per the WHO definition, as the harmonization definition that we use, we always say that occurs at doses normally used in humans. So that is a very operative word, and if we have used the right drug, the right dose in the right patient, then obviously it doesn't stand in the court of law, and one need not really worry about reporting an adverse drug reaction. Adverse event is another term which often gets confused with adverse drug reaction and an event, but as you really see there, adverse event not necessarily have a causal relationship with the treatment, but it is any untoward medical occurrence that may occur or present during a treatment with a pharmaceutical product. So the best example which you can think of is perhaps somebody who takes an antihistamine, the so-called non-sedative, including the so-called non-sedative, possibly becomes more sedated, and if he is driving a vehicle or operating on a machinery, ends up with an injury. So that becomes an adverse event, but it's not necessarily the drug itself has actually caused that. Sedation is an adverse drug reaction, is a reason, but it has led to something else. So we often see something like patients with the benign prostatic hyperplasia who have been put on this alpha-1 blocker. They tend to cause orthostatic hypotension, and if the patient is not well educated or not been warned about to take care not to get up all of a sudden when he's sleeping off and had to have a support before he stands up, then the patients tend to fall now, and because of osteoporosis or aged other diseases, likely that the patient may break his bone, but that doesn't mean that alpha-1 blockers breaks bone. So it's an event that has happened, but it is still drug related, but when the patient is on medication. So this is basically the difference between when we use an adverse event and adverse reaction, but an adverse event has a causal relationship is directly to the drug, then it turns to be an adverse drug reaction. Side effect is again one which unintended effect of a pharmaceutical product occurring at normal dosage, which is related to the pharmacological properties of the drug. But again, when we come to the clinical practice, actually we have left behind this as a side effect, untoward effects. We don't use that anymore. We either use it as adverse drug reaction or an adverse event. Signal is another terminology which you often hear when we talk about pharmacovigilance. A signal is basically a reported information on a possible causal relationship between an adverse event and a drug, and that relationship being unknown or incompletely documented previously. And this, usually we follow this up, especially when a new drug has come into the market. Then you need to really follow up those by techniques like prescription event monitoring or intensive medication monitoring programs, or it's also new terminology that is called as cohort event monitoring. A cohort of people who are put on these particular medications are very closely followed and then looked at any possible adverse drug reaction. Or whenever a first or a second one happens, then possibly that gives a signal. But again, you need more than one reactions to be reported or occurring with full available information, complete information to generate a signal, and again it depends upon the seriousness of the event and the quality of the information. And publication of a signal usually implies the need for some kind of review of or an action. For example, as academicians, maybe when we follow these patients in the clinical practice, we tend to publish case reports. So it may be one single case. So you report perhaps like gatifloxacin-induced hypoglycemia or gatifloxacin-induced dysglycemias, which came into the focus. Or maybe you have 2, 3, or 4 patients like that in your observation, you find and you publish it as a case series. So that further gives rise to signals, and then actually regulatory authorities or if such thing needs to review or take any action relating to that particular drug continuing in the market. An unexpected adverse drug reaction is again a terminology which you come across, especially when you are looking into the clinical trials and pharmacovigilance. It is an adverse reaction, the nature or severity of which is not consistent with the domestic labeling, that is our regulatory labeling, or market authorization or expected from a characteristics of a drug. So basically perhaps you're using a drug which belongs to a particular class of medication, maybe angiotensin receptor blocker. Usually none of them do have this type of reaction, but and also not labeled either in European market or in American market, but you tend to observe that kind of reaction, then that becomes a highly unexpected and adverse drug reaction. Two other terms which are confusing and which often we use in pharmacovigilance are serious adverse event and severe adverse event. A serious adverse event, this both words serious and severe comes from the English, and basically the difference is that a serious adverse event could be leading to mortality. It could be fatal as well. Whereas severe is, which is telling you what is, it may be mild, moderate or severe. Have a mild headache or a moderate headache, or it could be a very severe headache, but it's not necessarily serious. But reaction for perhaps something like when leflunomide introduced into the market, we did observe some of the very serious cutaneous reactions. So that is even leading to the death of the patients, toxic epidermal necrolysis. So that could become a serious adverse event. So or like drugs which are basically leading to conduction abnormalities in the heart and leading to the arrhythmias. So that could become a very serious adverse event. So this is the basic difference between serious adverse event and serious adverse severe adverse event. We have an adverse event when you see can include that. What are these can include? An exacerbation of a pre-existing illness, an increase in frequency or intensity of a pre-existing episodic event or condition, or a condition detected or diagnosed while on the study which may have been present prior to the study entry, or continuous persistent disease symptoms present at baseline which worsen following the start of the study. For example, if you are doing a study on COPD or an asthma, and you notice that the patient condition was at an exacerbation occurs, then that becomes an event. And again, that becomes just an adverse event, or it could become a serious adverse event if it leads to hospitalization. So based on this. But what an adverse event does not include is if there are any medical or surgical procedures that doesn't really come under adverse event, serious adverse event, or a pre-existing disease present or detected at the start of the study which do not worsen, that is also not considered adverse event. Situations where there is no untoward medical or occurrence, or example respite care, or the disease under study unless more severe than expected. So that is a more stable patient which have enrolled, and then it continues to be like that. Maybe a GINA 2, an asthmatic patient of GINA 2 grade or a GINA 3 grade, he continues to remain on the same dose of steroids or the same symptoms continues, then that doesn't really cause a adverse event. Some definitions continues. So a serious adverse event, so fatal. If it is life-threatening, then we call it a serious adverse event. Leads to hospitalization, we call it a serious adverse event, or a prolongation of hospitalization is a serious adverse event. Disabling or incapacitating, or any congenital abnormalities, also called a serious adverse event. Or important medical event that may jeopardize the patient or may require intervention to prevent. One of the other definitions is one of the other serious adverse event. So just brings us to again a problem. Is adverse drug reaction a problem? Yes, it is. Not only it's at the trial process, it's also in the general practice. Adverse drug reactions have been a problem for very important reasons, like because they can increase healthcare cost. Today, if you look at, there are a lot of papers being published around the world that what is the implications of an adverse drug reaction, especially in terms of healthcare cost. When the healthcare purchaser is the government, and what implications it does has, how many millions of dollars have been invested on treating an adverse drug reaction or adverse drug event. It also increases the rate of morbidity and mortality. We have figures from different parts of the world like America or UK and Australia and New Zealand and Canada. Unfortunately not from India. We do not have any of that kind of reports. Now slowly some reports are being published, which I will come to in a moment later. It also decreases in health outcomes and leading to the decreased quality of life. So these are some of the important reasons why we say adverse drug reactions are very, very important. If you look into the literature today, you find that at least 25 to 30% of the patient population who are admitted into the hospital do suffer from an adverse drug reaction. For example, I come from a hospital which has a 1,200 bed, almost with a 90% occupancy. At any given time, there may be 1,000 patients admitted in the hospital. Then I can expect that over a period of average stay of 6 to 7 days, at least 250 patients would have suffered from an adverse drug reaction. That's the situation. That applies throughout the world, not only in India. And at the same time, if you look at the number of patients who are coming into the hospital because of an adverse drug reaction related hospital admissions is almost 5 to 10%. So with that figure also has been variable from different parts of the world. So that means of every 1,000 patients being admitted to the hospital, if you say 100 patients are being admitted to the hospital, mainly because of an adverse drug reaction, they come there for the treatment seeking a drug-induced illness, then that means we have to really look at this adverse drug reaction as an important event, and also see how best we can identify them, treat them, and more importantly, prevent them. So what has happened in the international scenario so far? Most of these issues really dates back to the disaster from thalidomide. That led to a lot of changes in the drug regulations around the world, and from thalidomide disaster, when everybody thought that womb could be the very safe place for the fetus which is growing, even that was disproved, then they thought if that is possible, you take medications, many other things would also happen. So from that date, as the events happened, in 1968, WHO International Program for Drug Monitoring was started, which basically was more in Sweden, but under the guidance and policies of World Health Organization from Geneva. And that program, over a period of time in the last 40 years, has evolved very much. And today what we call as Uppsala Monitoring Center in Uppsala, Sweden, coordinates the pharmacovigilance activity throughout the world. So they are the main collection center, and from different parts of the world, today we have around 78 or 80 countries who are the members of this WHO International Drug Monitoring Program, and all reports get into that particular Uppsala Monitoring Center, and there it gets analyzed, and a lot of issues related to this pharmacovigilance and harmonization of terms we use, and or WHO drug dictionaries and adverse drug reaction terminologies, all these which are developed by Uppsala Monitoring Center, also helps in establishing national pharmacovigilance program. They also help in training people from different parts of the world in national pharmacovigilance program, and their main objective is to have a very good and managed drug safety monitoring practices around the world. So in the similar fashion, if you look at in UK today, we have the yellow card system, which we call Committee on Safety of Medicines, operating since 1964. In America, we have US FDA, which basically runs the MedWatch system. Also, we have in Netherlands, which has been started from 1960s. We have in Canada, adverse drug reaction to drug products, or monitored by Canadian Adverse Drug Reaction Monitoring Program. We have in Australia a blue card system, which has been operated through the spontaneous reporting system again under Adverse Drug Reaction Advisory Committee, or ADRAC. And we have in New Zealand. New Zealand is one of the countries which basically brought in this new concept of intensive medicines monitoring programs. China, which also started off with India, has gone way ahead now. Singapore has got a good working system. Malaysia, Norway, Japan, so like this, including countries like Ghana and Tanzania, has really coming up with that. And India also has put its effort. India joined this WHO International Drug Monitoring Program as late as 1998, I think. It became, initially it was an associate member, then it became a member in 1998. But what has happened? Maybe we just look at that. If you look at the history of Indian pharmacovigilance system, we always had two parallels of system running. One, we had the ICMR sponsored projects ongoing, and also we had the Drugs Control General of India initiated programs. So ICMR had some studies in 12 different centers, and the Drugs Control General of India, I think, had 3 or 6, I think around 6 centers, which is with assistance from Drugs Control General of India. But unfortunately, most often what happened was either it was a project-driven program or it was an individual-centered program. It was never built into a healthcare system. So that programs did not sustain. Unless the pharmacovigilance program is a part of the national healthcare program, it cannot sustain. If I am interested in this, I certainly work for it, I do bring projects, I do have enough funds, I run that project. There can be two situations. One is that I leave the place and go away for some reason, so the whole program will collapse. Or the sponsoring agency says that, okay, we have no more money for you, then again the program suffers. So either way it happens. But unless we bring in this pharmacovigilance program as a comprehensive patient care program, this will not sustain. The same thing happened in India. It happened for the last ICMR sponsored program as well as for the DCGI sponsored program. And again, in the backdrop of this TRIPS and GATT era, Indian government was forced to come up with a program, and that initiated this with the help of the assistance of World Bank, initiated a new national pharmacovigilance program. And this program is coordinated countrywide by Central Drug Standard Control Organization, and Drugs Control General of India is the basically I think is the member secretary for that National Pharmacovigilance Advisory Committee, which is run under the aegis of Health Ministry. But it is at this stage it is structured in a three-tier system with two zonal centers. One is All India Institute of Medical Science in the north, and other one is KEM Hospital in the west. And we have 5 regional centers starting from JIPME for the south, and BL Noida for the west, and we have for the center of India, Nagpur, and then we have one in the east from Calcutta, and we have the Lady Harding from Delhi. And we have around 28 peripheral centers spread across the country. So the whole program is supposed to run like this. Peripheral centers are active. Most of them are basically teaching hospitals. We collect the adverse drug reactions within that hospital, collect that information, possibly assess for its causality, and then once in every month, before the 5th of the month, I am supposed to send it to the regional center. So regional center puts all the around 9 or 10 from the south, let us say, put them together and sends it across to KEM Hospital, which is a zonal center. And the zonal center again receives from other two or three regional centers, and then it straight away goes to Uppsala Monitoring Center or the National Pharmacovigilance Center. But since we do not have a center actually operating in the CDSU, Drugs Control General of India office, now I think what was planned was basically to send off the reactions directly from the zonal centers to Uppsala Monitoring Center. But what is the outcome? But still again, the system is yet to evolve. I don't know whether fortunately or unfortunately I have been associated with that since its very beginning. I organized, from our institution, we organized the first workshop for this, again to revitalize the National Pharmacovigilance Program sometime in 2001. And it took almost 4 years to have a formal inauguration of this program being launched in New Delhi by the present Health Minister Ambumani Ramdas. And we took 4 years making so many meetings and making people come and meet and to have a roadmap, so-called roadmap for this. But we still do not have a system working. In my opinion, whatever we have today is still a blueprint of the larger plan. I do not want to really discuss the intricacies of the problems, what exactly we are facing. There are so many issues if we really want to address in that. But the situation is such that, again, we have come to a stage where we have to depend on the data collected in other parts of the world to make a regulated decision. So if you all remember, nimesulide hit the controversy, hit every newspaper. It's also on TV channels. There were so many things. So when our politicians were put in bad light, immediately they woke up and they started to really do something in this area. And so they started calling for, okay, we do this, come up with a program, so we give that money and so on. When the National Pharmacovigilance Program really started off with, even today I find that at the bottom line, all these peripheral centers really have got a lot of enthusiasm to work, but it is totally unmatched by the program managers in the top. So the top of our pillar, or rather the top of our pyramid, is so weak that at this stage, after having worked with them for last 5 to 6 years, I'm not very hopeful that this program will again sustain. But if we collect the data again from the other part of the world, the question is, what is the applicability of this data for Indian population? Because international differences are so much, We have disease prevalence is different. Of course, we had a lot of tropical diseases. Now again, we also have some of the other Western diseases. Genetic, we have different socio-cultural differences. Healthcare systems are very different. And we have health professional practices are very different in our country. Pharmaceutical formulations can be different. Indication for the use of medicines can be different, that is labeling indications. And we have so much of off-label indications being promoted by our pharmaceutical companies. Drug monitoring practices are very different. We don't have a drug monitoring practice at all in our country existing as such. So it is very difficult to say. And drug use problems are unique to India. It is very unique compared to other part of the world, like illiteracy, physicians are overloaded, and our patients can't afford to buy medication, so there will be so many treatment failures, or we have the failure to receive medications or so many instances. We don't have a good healthcare, national healthcare program as such. So because of these issues, it is important that India should have its own sustainable national pharmacovigilance program, but I'm not quite sure how far we are going to go with the existing one, but hopefully we would achieve that at least in the next 1 decade. So just to now giving that background of what's happening with the pharmacovigilance and around the globe, and what pharmacovigilance is and what national program has evolved so far. Monitoring safety in clinical trials, I just want to really address just 4 issues very quickly, like why report safety information, who does it, when and how, and where exactly ethics committees really come into the picture. It is basically to protect rights and well-being of human subjects. We have accepted that. To ensure that the data resulting from the trial are complete, accurate, and unbiased. That means we need to have all adverse drug reactions reported and built in the which is being submitted to the regulatory authorities. Otherwise, unduly we are highlighting or favoring a drug molecule, showing that it is more safe. And legally bound to monitor safety as per the regulatory authorities. And also to maintain standards of ICH and GCP guidelines, we should have accurate and verifiable data collected according to the protocol. So these are the main reasons why we should report safety information in clinical trials. The key players are many, but if you look at the other side, on the right side, investigator and special safety monitoring boards, and also have regulatory authorities. But institutional ethics committees or institutional review boards are one of the most important ones, which I would like to touch upon, because this whole seminar or symposium is organized with regard to the ethical issues on the ethics committee. What stages of drug development? We have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. In phase 1, you look at the preliminary evaluation of safety, and you look at the short-term safeties in phase 2, and in phase 3, basically you look at the short or long-term benefit and risk ratios, which is of course very difficult to assess. Where can the drug safety be involved? It involves at study start. Study start basically when you're even preparing the investigator's brochure, you have the pre-clinical toxicology informations. Even from that, you basically try to build in what to look for to the investigators, what type of adverse drug reactions can be expected, what is possible. So that again, what information you gather from phase 1 builds on to the phase 2. What you get from phase 1 and phase 2 builds on to phase 3. So like that, the safety information goes on during the study, and at the end of the study, again, all data is summarized and then it is submitted to the regulatory authorities. I just want to put up this statement as the granting of a product license for a new drug merely means that any hazards unacceptable to the licensing authority have not been identified. It does not ensure that a medicine will be safe in subsequent prescribing practice. So because sometimes, I have the experience of this both from the physician side as well as the patient side. When the patients are referred to us for the adverse drug reaction, like when we are talking to the patient, taking the medication history interview, the patient says, then how is it possible government has allowed this drug to be marketed? Or even the doctors can ask you the same type of question that, no, it's supposed to be the safe drug. So, but you can't really say that just because it is made available into the market doesn't mean that it doesn't have any unacceptable adverse drug reactions. But only what it says is that it does not ensure, but we have to really look into this subsequent prescribing practice. That's why we have the phase 4 studies. This becomes important to us because you are trying that in a very large population and real life situations of this. So it is carried on a basis of product characteristics of marketing authorized application or license indications and formulations. So in the ICH GCP guidelines, which was just presented, it considers the obligations of investigator, IRBs, and sponsor and monitor. All these people, all these are responsible for monitoring the safety issues. But anyway, we are not going to touch upon investigators and other things. I only want to really look at institutional review board and independent ethics committees, what exactly they have to really look for. So the IRB, IEC, basically as per the ICH GCP guidelines, should safeguard the rights, safety and well-being of all trial subjects. So the onus is on the institutional ethics committee. So that's the reason whenever in the institutional ethics committee, when permission is being granted for the trial to be initiated in any institution, it always says that the safety issues has to be reported, any adverse events, and if any adverse event happens also, it should be immediately brought to the notice of the ethics committee, and if it is a serious adverse event, then it should be, usually we follow the procedure of within 24 hours, it should reach the ethics committee, and within the next 7 days, it should reach all the members of the ethics committee and also the sponsor, or if the CRO is involved, it goes within 24 to 48 hours. It also reaches the regulatory authorities through the sponsor or the CROs. So there are set guidelines how to have what we call as expedited reporting. You have to follow those procedures. The institutional review board should conduct continuing review of each ongoing trial at least one per year. So this usually applies for very long-term trials, like some trials may go on for 3 years and some trials may go on for 4 years and 4.5 years, or even 7 trials and so on. In such situation, the ethics committee has got the onus of asking the principal investigator to present all safety data that is collected during that time period. So you have to review safety of trial. That especially happens when you have the committee is being submitted with all the documents. It is important the ethics committee should review that safety information. It should conduct continuing review of ongoing trials, may review data safety and monitoring report. Even that is, ethics committee can call for the data safety and monitoring reports, but of course that is if it is unblinded data. It may request additional information and also ensure for the communications. So communication pathway, it could be from the site investigator becomes aware of an event, determination if reportable under protocol, then determination if reportable to IRB, case report forms are completed, and local IRB paperwork has to be completed. So these are all the issues which in turn you can demand from, if you are an ethics committee, from your investigators in the institution, as that is their roles and responsibilities. You can also communicate with other departments and individuals. So the decisions with regard to status of research, status of impact on patient care, and role of investigator has to be done, and possible informed consent and protocol changes. Because in the informed consent, we always mention that what are the possible benefits and risks to the patient. So if you have something that has come out like this, because whenever a study is going on, we usually receive, if it's a serious adverse event, from the other centers, if there is a CM's forms. So that forms, if there is a very severe and more number of them, should that be really incorporated into the patient informed consent, or what amount and what should be the information that should be submitted. This I have just put in few things that this is what FDA guidelines basically wants to really, it's a draft which you really want to rewrite that. And these are all some of the issues from the ethics committees have really written to the FDA, what problems they face when basically they have these safety informations coming into the ethics committees from the sponsor or the contract research organization. Sponsors may not explain the investigator why an event constitutes an unanticipated problem for a particular study, nor explain how the event relates to the study they are conducting. It just as a piece of information, it comes to the, but that could be an out of context information. So what needs to be done in this situation? The limited information provided may not allow the IRB institutional review board to assess the significance of the event. This is again a problem which has been put forward by many ethics committees to the regulatory authorities. Events that were anticipated to occur, should that be reported or not, are often reported, which is not really necessary. Institutional review boards may receive reports on subjects who have not received the study article. This is again a debatable question. That is, they are in the control group of the study, but still we don't know because it's a blinded study, then you may not be able to say that. For events that are part of the underlying disease process or that occur at reasonably large background rates in the subject population, individual reports are almost never informative. So like this, there are some of these events which has been told. It's almost runs into 3-4 pages. But in summary, what they say is the receipt of a large volume of individual adverse experiences reports without analysis of their significance to the clinical trial rarely supports an IRB efforts to assure human subject protections. So the submission of reports containing incomplete information, inadequate evaluation of the relevance and significance of events demands IRB attention, but does not allow the IRB to carry out its responsibility meaningfully to evaluate the reports unless this comes. So IRB has got a role or the authority to demand for more information. If you sit on ethics committee, you can ask the principal investigator to get all possible information for you to make a decision. In conclusion, the final test of the safety of a drug is in fact its release for general use. Whatever happens, basically in clinical trials and whatever you get, phase 4 trials, very systematic post-marketing surveillance is very important. That's why even in the new Schedule Y now, Indian situation, we have put this what we call as PSURs, periodic safety update reports. Any new drug that comes into the market for the first 2 years, they have to submit PSURs once in every 6 months. After the 2 years to 5 years, first 5 years, then every year, and then after the 5th year, once in every 5 years, they had to remember. So it's mandatory that they submit the periodic safety update reports. That means they had to do the phase 4 studies. Medicines are both powerful healthcare instruments and profitable commercial product. So this is a very conflict of interest. We all have read this because of the rofecoxib. If Merck has invested some 1/10 of the money that they have spent on direct-to-consumer marketing, they could have done such wonderful post-marketing surveillance studies, and they could have prevented not only the such unpalatable incidences and also their name and integrity in the market. Science and policy do not keep pace. Policies takes a lot of time. Basically, it has to go through something. But as science, it can be very rapid. So as academicians, as we get involved, we should be more aware and then what's right and what's wrong, and that can always go through these kind of ethics committees. And we are all worried about our healthcare practitioners. We have taken the word that at least do no harm. So if you stand by that, then your patient safety is the most important issue, and safety is a journey. Safety is not a destination. So I feel that pharmacovigilance is a science which has developed to a great extent, and I'm sure in the days to come, this pharmacovigilance is going to have more important role to play in the healthcare management. Thank you for patient listening. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, in my country, Nigeria, we have what you call NLDEA, that is National Law Drug Enforcement Agency. This agency is responsible for any fake expired drugs in the market. Usually, if they get that kind of people or pharmaceutical, they send them directly to the jail. What is happening here in India?
In India, and I suppose you're addressing the counterfeit medicines?
Yeah.
Is it right?
Fake,
Fake and counterfeit medicines, yeah. In India, the situation has been the same. There was a lot of, not really in the last, I think 2-3 years ago, a lot of issues came up with regard to these counterfeit medicines, and part of India where they had manufactured, and there are two kind of issues happen in Indian situation, as I understand. Maybe Dr. Nadig knows more about it. He would, please correct me if I'm wrong. Let's say ranitidine is one of the most widely marketed drug, and you have 2 or 3 market leaders. So I prepare same Zinatac, but I have put ranitidine in that. But I only pushing that product through the back door, and I make money out of that. But still the patient is getting 150 milligrams or 300 milligrams of ranitidine, what is there? That's one situation where company is going to suffer a lot of loss, but the patient by per se is not really exposed to any danger of not receiving a medication. But the other end is that I don't put ranitidine at all in that. It has got some powder which I have punched into a tablet, and it is left to the market. So that issues has happened in Indian situation also, and then some of these Indian pharmaceutical company forms their own association to fight against these counterfeit medicines, and it happened in northern part of India was a hub of this activity, and WHO also took up made a lot of campaign, and in 2004 and 5 I think they made a lot of posters and distributed everywhere for these counterfeit medications. As per my knowledge, it is punishable under law, but what's happening is I'm not very sure, but there is certainly counterfeit medicines available in India, and that's one of the main reasons why we have perhaps this multi-drug resistance malaria, multi-drug resistance tuberculosis, multi-drug resistance HIV, and so on. Dr. Nadi, would you like to say anything on that?
You can finally in the marketplace make out what's original, what is fake. We have so far failed, and multinational companies now have a cartel where they are looking at how to exactly get hold of people who are into counterfeiting of drugs. But like I said, it's a parallel drug industry, and it has sizable business in this country. World over, we are stuck on exactly how we will handle this. But attempts are on. I'm sure we will get to some sort of answers.
Thank you for a good presentation. What I wanted to find out was we have several confounding factors, like the comorbid conditions and the other alternative systems of medications. So how do we say that a particular drug has produced this particular reaction? Is there any objectivity in it? And also there are several inter-individual variations. So isn't it very difficult, because we have been collecting voluminous data, and a lot of resources and the time is being spent in accumulating this kind of a data, and we have got huge databases, but then nothing practically is being done for it. So instead, I was just thinking, instead of wasting so much of resources on that, whether we could in fact spend the money on treating the reaction. And it is most often in the hands of a physician who is treating, isn't it? Because he's the first person who gets to know about the reaction. So it is all that he will say is, okay, stop this drug, I'll change the drug. So it is as simple as that. So do you think we need to waste so much of resources on having these sub-centers and so many peripheral centers and things like that?
I understand your question.
How economical is it to blow it out of proportion, saying that pharmacovigilance?
Absolutely.
Sorry, I have been a little critical, but these are the facts.
No. For first thing I would like to say is it is not really blown it out of the proportion at all. We have not addressed this issue, first of all. Not to blow it out, first of all, we have not addressed this issue at all as pharmacovigilance. Certainly, it is always a prerogative of the physician who is in. But what we are trying to look at is building up the drug safety data is basically for several reasons. One is that most important issue is that what is the preventability of a reaction, a particular drug. For example, if you see a manufacturer's leaflet, or if you see perhaps very good monographs like comes from American Hospital Formulary Society Drug Information book, or from the Martindale, you have the cautionary labels. Where do they come from? It doesn't come out of anybody's brain unless it has been observed and it has happened. So who observes it? People like me and you have to observe that, and then we have to document it, and then that gets into the literature. So unless we have this kind of people working, but how many will? It's not possible, it's not sufficient that isolated pockets, 1 person, 2 person, or few of us work and build up a data. Absolutely not possible. Like it has happened in UK, or like it has happened in America or in other part of the world. Even in India, we need to have a safety data, especially for the Indian situation. As you mentioned correctly that we have a very diverse group of population, one, and we have very different types of system of medicine being practiced. So the situations are different. Inter-individual variability is one of the most important reason why we should do it. So we are not, I do not think that we are wasting our money at any stage here at all. First of all, I don't think the government of India has invested any money in this so far.